Thank you very much indeed, Aris. And Steve, thank you for an inspiring, that was the word Aris used, session. There were quite a lot of questions that came up in chat, and I know that you weren't able to answer them with the keyboard. So does it make sense if perhaps we start with a question in chat that you really wanted to answer but couldn't?
Thanks, Neil. The problem is not only the writing. I can sometimes, I don't know what's going on here today, but I can sometimes see the questions and sometimes not. And so perhaps you can pick out the ones that perhaps you can lead me here, because I'm having trouble.
Okay. Christina, was there a question that you particularly picked up on as we were going on that you wanted for us to explore?
There was something very interesting about how it was a question that you kind of introduced, and it's had to square the view of observation with the educational systems or even accreditation courses that we as observers have to are on. So for example, if we're looking at CELTAs, or even educational work projects where there's a list of criteria. So how can we reconcile that? That's something that I'm sure most people, and in the chat they mentioned it, most people would be interested in knowing how to do that.
Yeah, you can't.
Oh, that surprises me. Why do you
think?
No,
well, I think this is a slow process. I think this is something which, if successful, if enough teachers, if enough institutions start to think about observation and start to adapt to a more humanistic and more, as I say, an open door system, then other things will change. But I don't think this is an overnight thing. I don't think you could. I was about to say, I don't think you can introduce this kind of observation into a CELTA course, but perhaps you can. I don't know. But I think primarily it's a matter of teachers like the ones who are here today saying, look, this is the way we want to go. This is how we want to do it from now on. Even my dog wants to do it.
Sorry. So I was thinking about this because, like Christina, like you, Steve, we've worked on CERT TESOL CELTA programs. And for those of you who are joining us who are not familiar with those schemes, they're typically pre-service, short 4 or 5 week programs done full-time, 8 or 10 weeks if done part-time, to enable people to start their journey in teaching English as a foreign language. And I think what's interesting, if we think about the British Council and the accreditation, so language schools in the UK are accredited by a thing called the British Council. And I think there is a possibility of introducing the kind of accreditation that you're talking about into the British Council accreditation scheme, because all it says is that teachers need to be observed. It doesn't actually say how they are to be observed, which I think gives a lot of flexibility for head teachers, director of studies, as we tend to call them in the UK, to bring about useful observations which enable teachers rather than squash them down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was academic advisor for a very well-known and very large summer school for a while. And part of my job was to train senior teachers to observe. And we use this system. We use the system that we're talking about now for some years. And when the British Council eventually came to inspect, I explained to them how we were working, and they were perfectly happy with it. So in that sense, it can be done. what is more difficult, of course, would be to get those British Council to get the British Council to promote this, as opposed to putting up with it, let's say.
I think there's an issue with consistency. That's something that they really do care about, and that most organizations do care about, and hence this reliance on the box ticking, because it allows a certain level or illusion of consistency. And this goes back to something Neil was mentioning also, and that was discussed in the chat, is the lack of training that observers, unfortunately, not on the go, as whether we talk about CELTA, whether we talk, as soon as you were a senior teacher, that's it, automatically, oh, well, why don't you go and observe some people? How would you know? Now, we have stuff like language coaches and these kind of programs, but they do not help. Now, sometimes on the big conferences like TEFL or SETA, they do these kind of like observation, but there is no grounding as what's your attitude, even something simple, which I think we mentioned with Neil beforehand and with Steve, which was the language to use. How to be belligerent, let's be honest. Sometimes it just feels like an attack on people's ability and on people's way of living.
If I can, I think the first thing that I absolutely agree with you. The first thing that comes to mind is money, I'm afraid, because the organization I worked for, the summer school I worked for as an advisor, was prepared to invest quite heavily in this idea, and they did. But not everybody is. I mean, if you think about the average language school around the world, think about universities that run English language courses. They're not going to do that. And so what? So what that leaves us with the practitioner having to invest in their own development, which is okay up to a point. I've always felt that, you know, we shouldn't be getting stuff for free. We should be investing our own money in our own development. Every other profession does. But on the other hand, we should also be having support and encouragement from the powers that be. Maybe
now's the time to pause to allow Waka to share her question. Welcome, Waka.
Yeah, hello, good evening.
Hello there.
Hi.
What would you like to ask Waka?
Yeah, my problem is that I've been teaching here a TESOL course here in Thailand for the last 7 years, at a university. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. We can hear you fine, Waka.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, but that's okay, no problem.
All right,
but
that's
you
fine.
can hear me. Yeah, I can see you. That's right. Yeah.
Good.
So the problem is that, for example, when I'm teaching, we are being observed with the cameras, as I mentioned earlier. That's one thing that is for the internal process, what they're going to look at it, what we are doing there. But the main issue here with me is that I've got students from about 50 different countries, you know, like from USA, from UK, from around the globe. And they come here to get a degree, and then they will teach in a school. So I know them, I can understand them, and they're from different background. I'm sitting there, I can teach the way they want me to do that process for them, like learning and teaching process. But there, somebody will come and they will try to observe me from other angle, like how do you teach, and this is the set rules for teaching and all these things. But then I tell them, you do not understand, because I've got experience in that thing, how to deal these kind of students and how they will understand and how they will learn, because they're from different backgrounds and they have a different educational background also. Now, they will tell me that there are rules and set rules, and there are the systematic thing as you talked about. And they will try to tell me to do it this way, not the way you are dealing with it. So that creates a lot of problem for me. And when we say that we'll look forward to that thing, which is the result of the whole process, that whether they are learning something or not. So I'm pretty sure that they do. But when these people come from different places, different universities, or whatever you call it, they have their own mindset and they want to change the whole thing, regardless of this, that they do not know anything about the background of our students.
So if I understand,
so what should we do with it? Like, how can we deal with this problem? Should I go with that systematic way or that humanistic way that I know my student and I do things according to their needs?
can I just clarify?
Yes, me too.
So if I understand correctly, Waka, you are a trainer and you are training pre-service teachers so that they can then teach in Thailand.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Okay, and you're concerned about how to even up the issue of a Ministry of Education, I imagine, telling you what you should do and maybe even how you should do it when you're trying to respond to the individual differences of your trainee teacher learners. Is that right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Waka. Great question. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, great question.
Thank you so much.
Great question. Fantastic question. No answer.
Can I ask you then, Steve, in Waka's shoes, what would you do?
Oh, well, I would try to use, I mean, it is very, very difficult when you've got, I've been a young teacher, you know, so I've been through the mill. I've had people come in with their clipboards and sit at the back of the class and then tell me what they think I should do. And I've known that they were wrong. I mean, not just, you know, a little bit. I've known that they were completely wrong. What do you do in that situation? Well, it rather depends on whether you want a quiet life or not, to be honest, because you can teach the way that you feel that you should teach when there's nobody else around. When an authoritarian observer comes in with their own ideas, you have two choices. One is to play the game. You can even tell your students, this is a possibility, and it's the only time I would recommend this, but you can recommend to your students, you can say, look, this person's coming in, they don't like very much what I'm doing, but you do. And so what I'd like to do today is to play a game. We're going to do exactly what this person wants to see. And then the other choice is that you confront them in the nicest possible way during feedback. And when they start to tell you what you should have done and didn't do, you say, look, thank you very much. I know that your experience is very valuable, but actually so is mine. And this is my point of view. And it's backed up by students' successes. So in a nutshell, Waka, these are the two choices that you have. I empathize and sympathize with you. You've got a tremendous problem there. You're not going to resolve it overnight, and you may have to go through this. From what you've said, I imagine that there are several different people who are coming in, not necessarily the same ones. So you may have to do this several times. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Thank you so much.
Christina, what's your view of this?
I would actually offer a third option. Steve, I completely agree with the playing the game. And I would even add at the end a little reflective kind of moment whereby you would ask prior to the lesson, you would tell the students, we're going to do that. Now, let's take that as a learning experience. Is there anything in what I'm doing today that you would like to see more of, or you know, let's just forget about it? So there'd be a little bit of more of like, you know, evaluation, reflection, so that they would feel a little like, you know, they are learning still, and it's not just playing a game. So that's one thing. But I would add a third option, which would be, and this might mitigate some of the issues, would be to have a instead of talking about it in the feedback, would be to talk about it pre-observation, and to have a pre-observation meeting whereby you try to identify, this would also help a little bit with the playing the game, identify some of the criteria that they want to evaluate you on, and maybe discuss the fact that you may not see it the way you want to see it, but the aims would be that, so you prepare the observer for a change, but highlighting the fact that the goals will still be achieved. This is time consuming, this can be frustrating, and it might not achieve anything. But I just thought that I would add a third way to this, because, you know, this is, I think, especially if we are interested in changing the system from within, this might be a possibility. I have worked with governmental organization in the Middle East. I know how they can have strict, and I'm not talking about just the Middle East, I'm talking about everywhere, how organizational, educational, organization can just be so strict and so unyielding. But maybe having that pre observation meeting could help loosen or make the experience slightly more enjoyable and productive.
Can I add a fourth option? Then Wako, will come back to you for your thoughts. And that is that, and this is exactly my situation right now, because I remember, and I think I alluded to this in a previous session that Steve and Christina were part of, when we did a previous session on observation here on Gallery Teachers, that I made the point I used to get really fed up of being observed. The teacher coming in and the director of studies coming in, and the teacher would serve up something special. And I just thought, I'm too busy. And yet I'm above that. I don't want to waste my time writing a special lesson plan, because I want to be evaluated in what I do day to day. Exactly. And I was very lucky, because my director of studies, I was senior teacher, was happy for me to do that. But ever since that time, I've been passionate about trying to introduce systemic change within the field of influence that I have, narrow as it is. And I have started to have some success. I can't share details because they haven't been agreed yet, but I'm at the point where here in the UK in the private language sector, the point that observers need to be trained in observation has now been recognised, and it's going to the next stage of working out what that looks like, but with a view to it happening in 2024. So my final point would be, Waka, you feel passionately about this, you work in a university, you clearly know what you're doing, so can you get yourself into a position of influence with the Ministry of Education that you can be talking to them about your view from within? Don't make them your enemy, make them your friend, become part of them, and subvert internally. Which is kind of what I did, but hopefully not subverting, helping. Lots of ideas though, Waka. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you so much. I've got two main problems here. Number one is that there is a language barrier. Yeah, they can understand what I say in the classroom, or they can observe me, but when I go to them and talk to them, they think that what I say they cannot understand. You mean what I say? Another thing is that they can see me in the classroom. I've got like 65 students in that classroom, aging from 21 to 65. Yeah. And they are sitting in another room. They can listen, they can see whatever we are doing. But at that time, I cannot see whether they are observing me or not. When the session is over, they will tell me that's what happened in your class. For example, the first 2 hours are for your lecture, and then you need to start the jigsaw, but you didn't start at that time. These are the things and the time you have to divide, like 15 minutes for this, 13 minutes for this, 20 minutes for that. It's not going to work like that, because sometimes you start asking you the questions.
Sorry, Wako, if I introduce you, I'd like to open this out to a more general point, if I can, because I think Steve, Christina, and I are all limited because we don't know your context, and obviously for everyone on the call. But we have a question which I think relates to yours. So, Wakar, thank you very much indeed for your contribution today. And I'm going to use it to open up a point to Steve and to Christina. So thank you for joining us. You might want to switch your microphone off, Wakar, just so we don't get audio feedback. But thank you for your contribution.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Steve, I don't know if you can see in chat, so I'll read. It's a question actually from Gabby, who says, what to do if the observer is not wrong and the observed teacher who thinks that the observer's got it wrong is in fact wrong themselves? In other words, it's almost the opposite of what Wakar was saying. The person being observed thinks you're wrong and actually you know you're right.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
Yes, it's another one of those. I mean, first of all, really, you've got to find out what wrong and right means. And as I've said many times, we don't really know what we're doing. But I suppose that one would have to argue one's case. If you're quite sure that you're right, if you're doing something which is, if you're doing something which you know is, I'm trying to avoid using the word right, but if you're doing something which you know works with students, and the observer says it doesn't, then you've got to politely argue your case, I think. I mean, there's no other possibility. I mean, going back over the presentation, if you look at the beginning, where I was, or not the beginning, but at some point towards the beginning, I said, you know, who are you? Are you the guru? What are you as an observer? So observers are not always right. And that really, in a sense, that creates part of the whole thing that I'm talking about, which is that we shouldn't be laying down the law. We shouldn't be telling people they're doing something wrong. We should be inviting them to discuss, you know, how to do it, what to do next time, whether they feel themselves that it worked very well. Personally, as an observer, I don't want to tell people they're doing something wrong. It's not my business. My business is to try to get them to self-assess if they want to, and to move forward in their own developmental route. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Christina, what's your view on this?
Slightly. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and you know, who are we to say anything? So what I do is that I try to take feelings out of it completely, because people get heated up very easily. Things get, you know, emotions rise, and then people start, because you're attacking their way of life, their way of work, their means of living, because this is their salary. So emotions rise and they get, you know. So what I'm trying is I try to take away feelings from this, and I go in evidence mode. I'm like, okay, you say it's worked, and it's quite close to what you said, Steve. Try to work together. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. You're saying, okay, so let's say this listening activity was successful, was effective. You're saying this, okay, fair enough. What's the evidence of learning? What's the evidence from the learners? Who did you notice that was? Just give me evidence. And obviously, as an observer, I have to take evidence. I have to write things. This is something that I've noticed in certain observers, is that they just write, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And then the observee would be, when? And they go, oh, sometime in the lesson. No, be ready to back it up. If you want, Steve, like you said, if you want the observee to back up what they're saying and to say, well, no, I thought it was useful, then the observer should be ready to do exactly the same. We shouldn't have an easy pass, just, oh, I say it is, like Wakar was saying, I say you did this. No, have backup, have times, and we have to be, and I'm not saying systematic in the sense of box sticking, but we have to be systematic in the sense of we take down evidence. Okay, so for example, 7 out of 10 students were involved in the lesson. Okay, so Do you find that this was an effective lesson if we have 2/3 of the students involved? And if the person says, yeah, I think so, because normally we only have half, then you take that from it. You don't start a conversation with an already decided. You have to be open, but to be open, backed by evidence from both sides. I think that's something very important.
I think perhaps if I could to add to that, I think we're heading towards the situation where we don't want a power relationship. I'm the observer, I know better. You're the observee, no, you know less. We don't want that. And I think, you know, if you've got a highly experienced teacher that you're observing, hopefully you can learn as much from observing them as they learn from what you observed. But I think also there is that occasion where you just have to say, I hear what you say. Thank you very much. And indeed, maybe we just agree to disagree and keep the personal out of it, as you say.
Yeah. If I can just, Neil, sorry to interrupt. If I can just go back to something that you asked in the chat that I've just seen, which was, how do you get teachers to agree to an open door system? And I've done that, so I know it can be done. And part of the process is what we're doing today, is getting people to think about it and encouraging them. I think it's linked to that idea of, well, two ideas really. One is the altar upon which I work. There's that thing, you know, that teachers think that they're somehow, they've got some sort of religious, to use the word loosely, which has to be, we have to get rid of that. We've got to throw that away. The other thing is that the whole idea of the best tablecloth, you know, if an observer's coming, I've got to do a special lesson plan and do this and that, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And that's throw that away. It's nonsense. Yeah. It doesn't help anybody at all. You open your door, and what happens is that people walk by, and as they walk by, you can see them and they can see you. And little by little, you get used to the idea. You get used to the idea of having, you know, people around, not necessarily coming in to observe, but just walking by, and maybe putting their head round the door and saying hello. Why not? The other thing that goes together with this open door policy is the snapshot, the pop in, pop out. So you're teaching, there you are, doing your thing, as you always do. Maybe you're having a good day, maybe not such a good day, it doesn't matter. And somebody pops in, sits down, says, hello, everybody, how you doing? And this is not an interruption. This is not an interruption. You are not the high priest. This is a human being coming in and being another human being amongst human beings.
Yes. Yeah. That leads me on to another question. Can I just perhaps illustrate what you're just saying? I'd be interested to see your thoughts on this. Now, I'm lucky to work in a school that is very supportive, but I also work with human beings, and I think it's fair to say that the teaching team still gets anxious, as most teaching teams do, when it comes to observations. And we've got a series of observations coming up in the near future. So I actually suggested that one thing we could consider doing was do 2 observations in a short period of time. We have to do a classic observation that's documented because of our accreditation. But I also said, what if we did a 10-minute drop-in at a time that the teacher chooses, into a lesson that the teacher chooses, and tell them that we don't want a lesson plan. And the idea is we're trying to kind of sensitize the teachers to the idea of the open door drop-in. We're not going to do it overnight, and it won't work overnight, but by doing the kind of, someone pops in for 10 minutes, and when they produce feedback, they're looking at the whole school. So it's very much a kind of a group thing. And then it becomes more hopefully less invasive the next time someone pops in for 10 minutes. And then we bring in peer observation. The director of studies takes over the class, enabling the teachers to pop in on another teacher that they would like to go and see teach.
Okay.
Quite often when I give feedback to teachers, I say, why don't you go and talk to so-and-so about what they're doing with this? Because let's face it, they're going to learn it much better, be more receptive to a colleague than they probably are someone who's perceived as being management. That was my first question.
Can I just put something in there before you move on to the next? Because quite important, I think. And that is the idea of having 10 minutes. Why? Why not have an indeterminate amount of time? Because if you have 10 minutes, people are sort of aware and might even surreptitiously start looking at their watches. Is he going? Is it almost eight minutes? Why not just say, we're going to pop in for a few minutes. Is that okay? And leave it like that. And then you can stay for 5, 8, 10, 12. Doesn't matter.
So arguably, participants of this webinar, what you've just seen is the kind of exchange that I think we would all like to see happening in teacher observation feedback sessions. Have you thought about doing this? And oh, that's good. Because I hadn't thought of that, Steve, but I can tell you why we went for 10 minutes, which was we wanted to go for something that didn't feel threatening. But as you say, it's not the amount of time and the end game that matters. It's the principle of coming and going, popping in, popping out.
Exactly.
If I may just interject here for a nanosecond, I think something very important is leading by example.
Yeah.
Director of studies should allow anybody at any time to come in and just observe. We always tell our learners, our teachers, and our teaching candidates, on courses, you have to, the final form of being a good teacher is to give back the power to the students. When you give back the power to the students, that means you are in control without looking in control. That is what it is. Then that is what we need to do also as observers. We need to give back the power to the teachers. You know what? Pop in my class anytime, any director of studies, or you know what? I'm going to take over your class for 10 minutes. Stay and have a look.
Thank you for that thought, Christina. Thank you for that thought. So that we've got time to explore the last question, can I segue on from that, come into my class? And I'd like, Steve, perhaps if you can share with us your thoughts on what it means for the observer to participate in the lesson that she or he is observing. Do you mean co-teaching? Well, how does that work? And how is it beneficial in your view?
Okay. Right. This is great because I love this. I love the idea that people can wander in. Let's imagine now that I'm still teaching. I'm not, I'm retired, but let's imagine that I am. So there I am, I'm teaching, I've got my class, and somebody wanders in, and as I said before, they introduce themselves, they say, hi, how you doing? Hello, Ramos, how you doing? And sits down, and I'm still, proceeding with my lesson. And so I ask a question, and there's no answer. So I can ask Nick, who's just popped in. Nick, can you help out here? Nick happens to know the answer, and so he can give the answer if he wants to, or he can give a helping hand to students who are still working on it. He can provide some scaffolding. There's a student at the back who's having trouble. I'm imagining that we've got rows, which is a shame, but I know that lots of teachers do have rows. I know that this happened. Anyway, so I can say to Nick, why don't you go and give so-and-so a hand over there? Or Nick might say, can I go and, I'm just going to give so-and-so a hand over there. And I'm going, hey, I don't even need to comment on that, actually. It's fantastic. So basically, I'm in the anything goes school. This means that observers who come in are expected to do more than simply watch me. They need to become part of the environment, part of the context. Now in feedback, this brings up a new dimension because it means that I, as the teacher, can say, look, Nick, that was great what you did there, because I was in my head, I was struggling how to resolve that, but you managed to do it. How did you do it? Right. And then Nick might say to me, for example, what did you think about my intervention there? Was that helpful, or actually did it divert the course of the lesson? And I can say, well, it did divert the course of the lesson, but that was great because it diverted it in a very positive way. So what I'm trying to do is to paint a picture of really anything goes.
Which speaks to the purpose of the observation not being evaluative.
Absolutely.
It's collaborative, supportive, and dialogic. Can I just understand, because I think what we've heard from Waka and from some of the comments in chat, that a lot of people are not yet and may not ever reach that very evolved sense of collegiality. If they're working in a context where evaluative observations have to take place for good or for wrong, would you anticipate the observer in an evaluative context, still being supportive, having that collaborative role, or something slightly different?
Only if they were a very, very experienced observer. Because if you're evaluating a teacher, then in a sense, Jack Richards is right, in the sense that you can't interfere. Because if you interfere, you change the course of the lesson, even minimally. And that becomes then an argument for the teacher to say, well, that wasn't my fault, that was your fault. No, well, it isn't it? I mean, we're talking about evaluation. So if you have to suffer evaluative feedback, I would say that the observer should not be involved. Because
because I think that helps us to kind of establish almost a parallel track way of doing things.
Yes.
But if you're stuck with, quote unquote, stuck with evaluative, try and bring on the other parallel track of supportive, dialogic, personal, in whatever way works for your context.
There's no reason
to necessarily.
There's no reason why, if you're in that situation where you're having evaluative observations, there's no reason why at the end of the feedback session one shouldn't say to the observer, look, that was really very useful. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but you can say that anyway. You can lie through your teeth. That was really useful. What I have this idea, and that is that next time, can we try something different? I'd be really interested to see what you think. And so what you're doing really is throwing the ball back to this official observer and saying, it's good, but I've got something better.
And in a way, that feels like it's almost the right way to end this session, because we're framing everything. We're coming to the conclusion that the most beneficial observation is the one where the person who has the control is the observee.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a positive note on which to end. Christina, is anything that you wanted to add in that vein?
Definitely, I agree. And I think, going back to the idea prior that we discussed, is the pre-observation discussion, where even if you are stuck, like you said, you're stuck with an evaluate, something that's going to be an evaluation, then you know what? Why not discuss the criteria beforehand, so that, the person's going to be observed is not blind going, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that's what's going to happen. It is essential that the observee knows what they're being assessed on. They have to have some kind of control over what's happening.
And, perhaps to add to that, these 10-minute pop-ins next week, so actually I'm doing, one of the things I've asked the teachers is, what do you want to get out of me coming into the room? Is there anything in particular you want me to look for that you'd like help with?
Exactly. What is it that you need help with? What do you think you're very good at, or you need help with? What can I help you with?
The other thing is that I've said to them, if you want to experiment, if you want to do something totally different you've never done before, do it. Because, maybe two people's views of how it went might be useful as well. On which point, Steve, as always, a pleasure. Christina, I get to work with you on a very frequent basis, but as always, a pleasure. And thank you to all of our participants for your questions and for the comments and to Waka for coming on and sharing his particular situation with us.